Let's now solve these tasks together. And let's of course start with task number 1. In task number 1, we want to create a new array that contains 3 hobbies. So I'll create that array, and we get various ways of doing that with the var keyword and this slightly more longer syntax, or we use the very concise syntax where I create a hobbies variable and we use the := operator to then create that array. Now here for task number 1, we need a real array. No slice, but a real array as I highlight here, and therefore we wanna define the length of that array. So the number of items that will be stored in it in advance. We also need to define the value type in advance. That's the case both for dynamic arrays, slices, and real arrays. And here, since I want to store some hobbies, so some text in the end, string sounds like a fitting name. And then you learned we need the square brackets in front of that. And since we'll have 3 hobbies, I'll add a 3 here. And then curly braces like that. Now we can set our different hobbies by accessing the different indexes and setting it like this. Or we set it all in one go and have something like sports, cooking, and reading as hobbies here maybe. And then of course we don't need a deadline unless we want to overwrite the first element. Now we created that array and we want to output that array, so with help of the format package and the println function, we can now print hobbies. And that should be task number 1. Now to see it in action, I'll run this module. So now we see sports, cooking, and reading here. This is working. In task number 2, we now want to output more data from that array. The first element standalone, and then the second and third element combined as a new list. So for that here, task number 2 involves some printing. But now I want to access the first element. And you saw the syntax a couple of seconds ago actually. We can access specific elements in an array to read or set them by using square brackets after the variable name that contains the array. And then we use the index of the element that we want to read or write to. Now the index, that's the important thing, starts at 0. So if we want to read the first element, we don't use 1, but we use 0 instead. And this will now output the first element. Now that's not all though. We should also output the second and third element combined, and for that we'll need a slice, because we learned that with a slice we can select a subset of an array and then work with that. So if you want to select the second and third element, then we want to start at the element with index 1, which is the second element, and then select everything up to another index. That index will be excluded though. So if I would write 1:2, we would not select the second and third element, which you might think, since we have the indexes 1 for the second and the index 2 for the third elements. But instead, since that element will be excluded, we would just select the first element. Instead, we need 3 here, so the index of the last element plus 1 to select that last element and include it in that slice. Or we use the shortcut and just type 1:nothing to select everything up until the end of that array. Now here I'll go for the more explicit syntax, but either of the two approaches is fine. And with that, just to quickly check that, if we run this, we now see sports, which is that first element for line 11, and then cooking and reading, which are the last 2 elements, so the second and third element for this line of code here. So that's also working. In task number 3, we should now create a slice, another slice, based on the first element, so based on that first array actually that we have here, that contains the first and second elements, instead of the second and third elements which we have here. So in task number 3, I'll add a brand new slice and now also store it in a variable, and I'll name it main hobbies maybe. create a brand new variable, and then use my hobbies array and create a new slice. Now to select the first and second elements, I want to start at the index 0 and then select everything up to index 2, since that will select everything up to the element with index 2, which is the third element, which is then excluded, so it will select the first and second element successfully. Alternatively, here we omit the 0 to start at the beginning of that array on which this slice is based, and then just go up to the third element and exclude that element. Either way, we'll select the first and second element, and with that I also show you two approaches of making that selection. And then we also want to print that so that we don't get an error, and print main hobbies here. And now if I zoom out a bit so that we have more code on the screen, if I run this code again, we do get sports and cooking here, which indeed are my first two elements. So that is also working just as it should. Now, task number 4 wants us to reslice free and change it such that we contain the second and last element now, instead of the first and the second element. Now that works because behind the scenes, a slice actually just points at a part of an array, and we can always select more from that array as long as we expand our selection towards the end of the array. Towards the beginning, that's not possible. And as a in-between step, we can actually again print the capacity with the cap function of main hobbies. And what we'll see when I do that, and I run this code, is that that capacity is free even though main hobbies only contains 2 elements. It's free because the array on which it's based actually has 1 extra element after that last element that we select here when we build that slice. And again, as I mentioned, extending the selection towards the end after we already have a slice is always possible. So we can reassign a value to main hobbies. Hence, I'm not creating a new variable here. I'm using an existing one. And I actually reassign based on my existing main hobbies slice. And we want to create a slice that gives us the second and last element. Now we are basing this new slice on the existing slice. The existing slice contains the first and second element. But because we have that link to the behind the scenes array, and extending towards the end is always possible, we can also expand this slice to get the last element of the existing array. Now I'm not interested in the first element anymore, and therefore I'll start at index 1 to omit that first element, which was still part of that slice before, because we included the first element here when we originally created that slice. Now I want to go all the way to the end, and you could therefore think that you can just use this shortcut, but that would actually not work. If you save it like this and you then actually print main hobbies like that, if you give this code a try, you'll see that it actually just outputs cooking. So the last element, reading, is not included. The reason for this is that I'm building my new main hobbies slice on the existing slice. And the existing slice does not include the last element here because we only selected up to the last element. So only the first 2 elements. But I mentioned that expanding would be possible, and it is, but if you do expand a slice in the process of reslicing, then you explicitly need to specify the end index. If you leave it open like this, it will use the last value from the existing slice instead. If on the other hand I set this to free, as we did it here in line 12 as well, then we explicitly tell Go that we want to go to the underlying array and give us the element prior to index 3, which is this element which has index 2, and include that in the slice. Can be a bit of a gotcha, but this is how we can now extend our selection here. With this, if we now run this code, we got cooking and reading included. So the second and third element with that reslicing approach. Now in task number 5, we now want to leave that array we worked on thus far and instead create a brand new array that has one special trait. It should be dynamic. So we should be able to add new values to it. And therefore, here I'll add my solution for task number 5. And since it's an array that will contain a bunch of course goals, I will name it course goals. That's my variable name. And to create a dynamic array, we need to create a slice right from the start and let Go create the underlying array behind the scenes for us. The syntax for that is very similar to what we had up there. The only difference is that we don't specify a length ahead of time. The syntax we need here is that we still want to store strings because our goals are still pieces of text. And we still need the square brackets, but we don't give this a fixed length. Instead, we leave the square brackets empty and then add our curly braces to either create this as an empty slice at the beginning or to already store a couple of values. And since we should create at least 2 goals here, I'll start by setting 2 goals, which are learn Go and learn all the basics, something like that. These are my course goals. And that's already task number 5. Now we can also print this to see whether that worked, and hence print course goals. Go run this, and we see our course goals here. So that is working. In task number 6, we now want to change that dynamic array, and we want to set the second goal to a different one and also add a brand new third goal. Now let's start by setting that second goal. For this in task number 6, I'll first of all access the second goal in course goals by its index with this square bracket notation, and the index here is 1 for the second goal, and we can change this to learn all the details. Something like that. Now we should also add a brand new third goal, and for this we can set course goals equal to the result of calling append. And append, as you learned, is a built-in function that operates on slices and allows us to add brand new values to slices. And here I want to append 2 course goals and append a brand new third goal, which is learn all the basics again, maybe. So we overrode learn all the basics with learn all the details, and then we add learn all the basics again as a third element. And now with that, if we print our course goals here after changing those goals, if we run that code, indeed we now see we have learn Go, then as a second goal, learn all the details, since we changed that here, and then as a brand new third goal, learn all the basics. And as explained, behind the scenes, Go did create a brand new array for us, basically ditch the old one, and bind this slice to that new array. That all happens behind the scenes for us. We don't have to worry about it. Now in task number 7, I now got a bonus task here that involves a struct. A product struct. And therefore we first of all need to define this struct. So maybe here, right at the beginning of the file, I'll define my product struct as we learned it, give it an ID, which is maybe a string, a title, which might be a string, and then a price, which could be a float. Now we got the product struct. Now I want to create a dynamic array based on that struct. I want to create a dynamic list of products that contains at least 2 products right from the start. And then we want to add a third product to that existing list of products. That might sound overwhelming, but thankfully it's actually not difficult. Here for task number 7, I'll add my products variable. And here I want to contain a dynamic array. So we need a slice. So we need empty square brackets. Then the data type is not string or float or int, but it's product. And I mentioned this before already. You can create arrays that contain structs or even other arrays. You are not limited to the primitive value types of numbers and strings. Storing structs in arrays is absolutely fine, and that's what we'll do here. So this syntax now creates a slice, a dynamic array that contains products. And we can now initialize it with some product data by using the struct literal notation here to add brand new products with an idea of first product maybe, keeping the order defined here when I set up the struct. Alternatively, we can assign values by using the keys again, but here I'll just keep the order, add a comma, and add a first product as a name here, as a title, and then as a price $12.99. Since this can get a bit tricky to read here, we are also allowed to split this across multiple lines as long as we add a comma here at the end, and then even split the struct creation into multiple lines, and also add a comma here in line 44. And now if I reformat this, this is more readable. Now that's one product. We can now copy that and add a second one. So the second product, where I say a second product, and this has a price of $129.99. And that's now my products list, my dynamic list full of product struct instances. Of course, we could have also created those instances in variables ahead of time and then just added those variables into that list, or we do it like we do it here, all in one go, just in time. Either way is fine. And now, of course, we can again print our products like that. Now, when I save that, you'll note that I have some yellow squiggly lines here that tell me that I have some redundant type here. Now, it turns out, and that is something you can't know, but it turns out that when you create such struct literals inside of such an array, which already is defined to only contain these kinds of structs, you can omit the struct name here and just create the structs like that. Since Go already knows with certainty that this list will only contain products, because you clearly define it here. So then you don't need to repeat that type name here when you create the struct instances, even though you are allowed to do it. But it's redundant, so you can shorten the code to look like this. And now with that, we're creating that list of products, we're outputting it, and hence if I run that code, we see our product list down there. Now, since it's a slice here, and hence a dynamic array in the end, we can also solve this last part of the bonus task where we should add a brand new third product. And for this, we could create the product just in time or actually create a new variable that contains it. This is up to you, where I create my product with that struct literal notation. Now we need the struct name again, because here it's not clear that we'll have a product struct in this variable, because we're just creating the variable. And then here I'll give this an ID of third product as a name, and give this a price of $15.99 maybe. Don't forget the comma at the end here to be allowed to structure it across multiple lines. And then we can append this new product and change our product's variable to be equal to the result of calling append on products, where we do append this new product now. And then if we want to, we can also again print this updated products array. With that, if you save everything and you run this, you now find that updated list down there, which contains that third product. And that's now also the bonus task solved. Maybe you also were able to come up with that. Maybe not with that shorter syntax here, but with the rest of this task. And if you did, great. If you didn't, no problem at all. We haven't seen this before, and now you did see it. you now also know that you can store structs in arrays and how that works in detail.